Good morning. This is Jim Hennager again with New Independent Party Table Talks. It's November 21st. We've had a change in weather here in Iowa. I tried to show you a little bit of what I see out my windows. We live here next to a small lake, and there must be hundreds and hundreds of Canadian geese here this morning. They usually are here until middle of December, and then they take off. So it's a change of weather. I think we're seeing a lot of changes around the world. So it's appropriate. Things change. Weather changes. Politics change. Economics change. Everything in the universe changes. Okay. Today I'd like to continue with what I had started before, indicating that with my students I tried very hard to get them to look at things in levels. All organizations, all companies, all politics, all corporations have levels. And at each level they have different priorities, different ways of looking at the world, different goals in mind. So if you don't understand all the levels and how they interact, it's very easy to miss what's going on. I also try to have them look at things from a Rubik's Cube point of view. There's so many sides to complex issues that it's important to be able to look at all the kinds of issues from as many different directions, and that means getting information, content from different sources. What happens so often is people are only caught up in a certain genre of literature or content, and it keeps them very biased. So I think of it as riding on a merry-go-round. You can travel a long ways if you stay on the merry-go-round all day, but you really haven't gone very far. And unless you get off that merry-go-round and pick up on other literature, on other kinds of conflicting kinds of information, you can miss a lot in seeing the reality of certain events historically, or in understanding things as they're happening. The other thing that I try to do is to develop ways of looking at literature and content, so that you can kind of see that where that literature comes from or where that content comes from can actually bias how it comes across or what they're trying to tell you. It's sort of like if you have three friends and one came to you and said, the sky is blue. A second friend came and said the sky is green. A third came and said the sky is orange. Well, you would say, well, logically they can't be all three at the same time. There must be something going on here. So when issues come at an individual or a whole nation, and you get information coming that says it's A over here, and then you get counter information that says no, the truth is over here, you have a problem. And I try to tell students that once you see that happening, and many times in complex issues it's not just A or B, it's A, B, C, D, and maybe 100 different options coming at you, that you have to be very careful to look at all of those issues and see how they interact and maybe the biases that are coming at you. So if you have these three friends, you could say, well, they're all colorblind. They don't know what they're seeing. But there might be reasons that they're seeing it differently. So maybe one person is seeing a morning sunrise, and that's why it looks orange. Another one might be looking at it at night and it's black. The other one might be looking at a very blue sky during a fair day, so similar to the blue sky that we have here today. Now, the person that's saying it's green, that creates a conflict. You've never seen a sky that's green, so again, you're going to have to do some more research. You're going to have to find out what would cause the sky to be green. Maybe it's pollution, you see. So the point I'm trying to make is that just because an issue comes at you and there's an element of conflict in it, it can't be all things. A, B, both can't be true if they're exactly the opposite. So your responsibility is to look into issues as deep as you can. Now, on an academic level, like a master's thesis, we sort of expect that the background reading and content of an issue, you'd get to the level where 80% of everything that you're reading or coming in contact with is familiar with you. That's a huge task because today we have millions and millions of articles. It's almost impossible for one person to ever read everything that's related to any topic. So if you can get to that 80% level, in other words, everything that you encounter that's new literature or new content is familiar with you at the 80% level, you're probably doing pretty well. So what I'm finding is a lot of people, they don't get past the magazines at the checkout stand at the grocery store. Some of these magazines are at such a low reliability. I mean, these magazines actually make stuff up. So if you're living your life at that level of content, that level of rigor in your understanding of it, you're never going to get very deep and into the issues. So content and literature have levels as well. So the lowest one would be that, and then you come up and you probably are going to be talking about public newspapers and public TV. And again, the rigor of those is not very reliable. They're very biased. We'll probably get into that. Mainstream press, mainstream media has some very clear biases, and those biases come across in their content and what they're trying to sell. Usually, they're very connected to their advertisers. So that would be the next level. And then you can get into more academic kinds of literature that has been looked at by other peers. That's called peer review. And you can get up to a point where what's coming at you has been tested and researched by other people and given feedback on it so that it's much more reliable. But I can tell you that even at that level, we can give all kinds of examples where what they're trying to indicate to you is still biased. And you just always have to be very careful. So it's very dangerous to say this is the way something is. It could change tomorrow. You might be getting bad information. But that person that said the sky was green might be trying to mislead you. He might be deliberately trying to give you bad information. And if you couldn't go out and look at the sky and you had to take their word for it, you could be into a problem of your own because you couldn't confirm it, you couldn't verify it. You have to understand that a lot of content, a lot of literature, a lot of publicity, a lot of political ads, and even statements by the government are biased. They're really trying to push you into looking at the world or looking at some information in a given way. That's kind of where I'd like to go today because one of the things the New Independent Party has found is that the information we're getting from the federal government here in the United States is being engineered. It's being manipulated to basically show who's ever in power at the time most favorably. There's 4 statistics that are coming at us these days, and all 4 of them are highly biased. And it's up to you how you want to look at this. These aren't my ideas. I'm getting them from a lot of people in the fields, and also from the literature that's not mainstream. Sometimes you have to go to literature that's independent, that's not being paid for by certain government or research groups or corporations, and that's often hard to do. The first one is the unemployment rate. Just recently they announced that in the United States the unemployment rate is now down to 5% nationally, and in some states it's even lower than that. However, that number is very, very misleading. And since, if you went back to the 1970s and had it figured the same way they did then, that same number might be 8, 9, 10%, not 5%. And it's in how they, determine those numbers. For example, today the unemployment rate is figured by the federal government by only counting those people that are qualified for federal unemployment. They've restricted it severely in the last few years. It doesn't count anybody that's retired and gone off of employment. It doesn't count anybody that's lost their job and couldn't find another one and has simply given up looking for another job. It doesn't count anybody that's out there working 1, 2, 3 part-time jobs, so they're not showing up as qualified for unemployment. That's terribly misleading, and I think it's basically wrong. If the new independent party had its way, we would like that unemployment rate to reflect reality, to be honest. Because if you added in the people that are underemployed, those people that are looking for jobs, those people that have 2 or 3 part-time jobs, those people that have given up at 62 and have gone on to Social Security, the real rate in the United States is closer to 20 to 23%. And that's a devastating number, to be real honest, and it hasn't really gone down in the last 10 years, certainly since 2008 when we really saw it spike. But a lot of 50-year-olds and up have not been able to get back into the workforce. And just because they've gone on a minimal kind of existence with social welfare or Social Security, that's highly questionable as a public policy. Also, when you look at it, just logically, we now have more than half of all American adults not paying income taxes. That means they're at the poverty level or below, the level on the tax rates where they have to pay. That doesn't make sense if there's 5% unemployment. We have, I've seen numbers from 44 to 50 million people on food stamps. And again, that's per family. So if you take that times 3 or 4, we're looking at possibly hundreds of millions of people involved in that statistic alone. So again, if you look at things logically and you look at what the government numbers are, they're right and left. It's A and B. It doesn't make any sense. I think it has to do with the politics of the numbers. They're giving us numbers that are very, very biased. The second number that they're giving us, which we just saw here in the last couple of weeks, is the employment number. They're saying that over 200,000 people got jobs last month. But when you look into those numbers, you find that they're using a model, and that model automatically adds 145,000 jobs that nobody can show that they're real jobs. The model simply says in an economy our size, we should be generating 145,000 jobs a month, whether we are or not. You see, that seems very misleading because, what we're finding is the jobs that are being created are jobs in the retailing, maybe they're temporary jobs leading into the Thanksgiving, Christmas season. They're jobs in the restaurant business. They're part-time jobs. So here, in the employment sector, for that job, they count the people that are part-time. And if you happen to, basically have 2 or 3 part-time jobs, they're counting you 3 times. That doesn't seem fair, and it's very, very misleading. Plus, if you look into it deeper, there are almost no jobs in the last few months in manufacturing, which is a very bad sign because it means that the orders for new goods are way down. I have information that shipping companies and railroad companies are starting to lay people off because there's no orders, there's no deliveries, there's no purchasing of new goods. So if inventory is down even before this season, all of those goods have probably been delivered. So they're looking at a very down business cycle from January on, and that would indicate that employment is going to go on, less and less. So that's the second number that I question, and again, I would like that number to be more realistic and not based on an automatic model. There's got to be some way that you can basically count the number of new jobs being created to give you an idea, how you can work with the economy to create jobs in those areas. And obviously creating jobs that are part-time and, temporary kind of jobs doesn't really do America a lot of good because they just keep recycling. Now, what we need are jobs that are long-term and pay above the poverty level, 35,000 and above. And the idea that you can do that by bringing up the minimum wage is very dangerous. I would support that people at the minimum wage can't make a living, and maintain a reasonable lifestyle. That's obvious. But at the same time, if you look back, when I was 18, 19 years old, I was working for $1.25. My first job as a professor paid $9,500. The second job paid $11,500. So, back then, a can of soup might have been 19 cents. I can remember buying 5 hamburgers for $1. I can remember getting 5 boxes of macaroni and cheese. I can remember getting 4 boxes of something I could heat up in the oven to eat for 25 cents a day. Of course, those prices have gone up. I remember I managed a gas station in 1971, and gas was selling for 19 cents a gallon. So obviously the costs were much lower, the wages were much lower. You could get by probably during that time period, similar to what somebody is at $7.25 today. But if you move it up too fast, like some people want to move it up to $15 an hour, what you're going to do is you're going to take all of the small businesses and they're going to lay people off. If they can't afford to survive at what they're paying now, they're not going to be able to survive at twice that much. So it's very dangerous to get into that kind of game where you want to squeeze, the economy is sort of like a balloon where you squeeze it at one end and it pops out at the other. But it reverses. If you raise the wages on one end, it's going to create problems on the other end very quickly. The answer to that situation, and I'll get into this more at a later time, the answer is not to raise the wages artificially, it's to create an environment that companies are making enough profit that they need employees. Do you follow? And we can't do that in an economy where the dollar is only turning 1 or 2 times. Normally it turns 4 or 5 times. So we're in an economy where credit is low and where the turn of the dollar is very low, and we need to develop strategies to change that. And there are ways that we can do that, which I'll get into. And one of the strategies I'll just mention right now is to move from what I call a zero-sum strategy, where companies want to make the most money at the top and give it to the investors and pay the least to their workers. We need to move it to a non-zero-sum strategy, which would be similar to an employee-owned company, so that if you're making profits in the company, they basically go to the people at the bottom, the workers. They get to share in those profits. That raises wages, real wages. So it's a much better strategy than forcing, an artificial minimum wage on people. Now, the third statistic that is very misleading is the inflationary rate. If you've been following, the Federal Reserve is always saying, we got to make our decision on raising the prime interest rate based on what's happening to the inflationary rate. And for the last, decade, really, we've been saying that the inflation rate is very low in the United States, so 1.5, not even 2 percentages of inflation. But again, what they've done is changed how they figure that number. If you go back to the 1970s, it would be dramatically higher. The real inflationary rate, if you wanted to call it that, is probably close to 6, 8, maybe even 10%. Why is that? Because they've taken out certain numbers from how they figure the inflationary rate. For example, they don't count food, they don't figure in the cost of gasoline or energy, your electric bill or your gas bill, your food cost. All of those have been taken out of the inflationary rate. Well, what costs have gone up the most? Those very costs. If you just looked at my examples of macaroni and cheese being at 19 cents in 1970 and now it's probably $1.69, that's a huge increase. If you look at the price of milk from 1970 to now, you can see the price of a gallon of milk is much more than the price of a gallon of gasoline. So all the costs that have inflated the most, they're not counting. Okay? And why would they do that? Well, their argument is that we're only going to be interested in those things that relate to labor costs. Labor costs haven't gone up. to the cost of goods. Cost of goods haven't gone up. Cost of shipping, that hasn't gone up other than the price of energy. So they're only counting those things that have remained very stably low. But if they were to add those commodities that have gone up, the inflationary rate in the United States, the real inflationary rate is much higher than 2%. If it's not 6 or 8%, it could be 10 or 12%. Okay? I hope you understand that I'm just giving you, the facts as people are presenting them to me. I'm not making these numbers up. You're welcome to check them out. The last statistic that concerns me is how they're figuring GDP. The gross domestic product is often a number that we use in the United States to show economic growth, economic stability. It reflects the total amount of economic activity in our economy. And generally, we've been running about 17 trillion. I think it was 17.4, maybe 17.6, in that range in the last couple of years. So that notion of how our economy is doing is very important, because politically it says whether the economy is doing well and whether we're in a growth cycle. But we haven't been in a growth cycle for a long time. The average growth here in the United States is maybe 1.5% to 2% growth when you figure the numbers that they give us. It also becomes important because that GDP gets figured into how the Federal Reserve looks at the money supply. And if you don't know, we're going to talk about it another time. The Federal Reserve has increased the money supply dramatically since 2008, maybe adding $3 or $4 trillion, and you can't just add that much credit to the system without affecting it. Again, it's the balloon thing, and we're not seeing that. We haven't seen any real growth in the economy because we put $3 trillion into it. You would think rationally that by putting that much money into the economy, we would have seen 5-6% growth, and we're not. So where's the money going? That's a good question. We're going to look at that in another session. But what concerns me even more is the way they're figuring GDP now. They have some exaggerated numbers. So where everything else, we're talking about inflation, they're holding that down, and employment, they're holding that down. But now you come to the GDP, they're actually artificially increasing it. They put some models into this that say that certain sectors of the economy, particularly the technology side, is undervalued, even though sales of computers, sales of electronics, iPads, and all of those kinds of things can be sort of tracked. They're adding 20% or more to those values. So instead of 17 trillion or whatever it is, our actual gross national product is much less. Now, how much less? I don't know. It could be 300 or 400 billion less. It could be 1 trillion less. Okay, I haven't been able to get into those numbers. I urge you to look into them. But what I'm telling you is it's a biased number. There's no way they can show that there's real numbers behind the GDP that we're being given. So if we have a poor economic growth and the economic development is even less, we could be negative. And they don't want us to think that. They want us to think that things are good, that they're getting better, when they're not. I would rather have reality and know exactly what the truth is than to be deliberately misled. And particularly in this GDP, because we now have at least one country in China whose growth rate has been substantial in the last decade. Till today, last year, they were saying that their gross national product, GDP, could have been 17.2. So here's China at 17.2. We're at 17.4. That's very close. It's a bragging rights kind of number. And if our number isn't right, then we're misleading the world. Okay. But my guess is that the Chinese number isn't right either. I don't know exactly how they put theirs together, but it strikes me that they would probably inflate their numbers as well. And their economic growth has come down, but it's still 6-7%. And it's based almost entirely on credit, almost exactly like our economy grew in the 90s on credit. Well, you can't grow an economy on credit alone without getting into some problems, because sometime somebody has to pay that credit back. And on the consumer credit, just in 2005, 2006, the consumer credit was so large in the United States that it was at 104% of our ability to pay it back. At the same time, our savings rate on individuals and companies was so low, it was negative. So you don't have to be an economist to understand that that's a dangerous situation, and it's probably a big reason why we got into the collapse of economy in 2008. Well, we still have some of the same problem. Now, we've seen the savings rate increase in the last few years, and we've seen the consumer credit come down, but it's not coming down by that majority of Americans who are, going paycheck to paycheck. It's coming from the upper middle class and upper class who've been basically able to pay off their credit, and they're socking their money into some kind of savings program. Okay, so we have a very big divide between those who have money and those who are just making it day to day, and it's still reflected in the credit and the savings rates. And we're not creating a lot of savings in the people that are making less than $30,000. They don't have a lot of discretionary money that they can turn the money in a community, and we're not really answering those issues other than to give them things, give them food, give them welfare, give them a monthly check. So in America, we're getting more and more people on welfare and fewer people working. And this is going to reflect in many ways. Social Security is one. When Social Security was started in the 70s, the average age of death was 65. So they figured, well, let's put it at 65. We won't have a lot of people that we have to pay. But now today, the average age of death for women might be 78. For men, it might be 76. So we're living a lot longer. But at the same time, we have fewer people working. In the 1930s and 40s, into the 50s, we might have had 70 people working for every person going on Social Security. Today, it could be down to 5 or 6 people working for every person that's going on Social Security. That's a prescription for disaster, because the direction we're going, with maybe 10,000 or more people turning 65 every day, and that's a huge population, the war babies kind of thing is coming at us, that we're going to get down to 2 people working for every person on Social Security. That's already happened in countries like Germany, Finland, and Sweden, Denmark, and Holland. And what happens? Their tax rate is astronomical. I think in Germany they're paying 52-53% of their income to taxes to pay for that imbalance. Some of these other countries are paying as high as 60% or more. The accounting department, the federal accounting department, clear back in the Clinton administration, estimated that by 2030, in that time range, we're going to have to raise taxes to 72% to pay for all the people on Social Security, social disability, Medicare, Medicaid. And so what have we done? We haven't raised the rate for deductions on Social Security or Medicare. In fact, we lowered them, which seems very strange. And at the same time, we're adding so many more people that that's going to be a huge problem in the next 20 years. There's just no way to get around it. That the Social Security Fund and the Social Security Disability Fund, which is already broke, and the Medicare and Medicaid are taking up maybe half of our budget. Federal budget is going to these kinds of automatic payments, and there's no caps on them, which is a very dangerous thing. If in your checkbook you could just write checks forever, how long would it be before the bank cuts you off? That's not symbolic. That is real, and the same thing applies to governments. So we've just been writing checks, and there's nothing been behind them typically. So we're not moving to solve those issues, and economically it goes back to some of these numbers that the government is giving us that are not real. And I think the New Independent Party is asking that the numbers get real and that we develop strategies to resolve some of the issues that these numbers are actually creating. We need to find a solution to Social Security. We need to find a solution to disability. We need to find solutions to Medicare and Medicaid. And, you know, as much as I would like everybody to have health care, actually adding expenses to the Affordable Health Care Act, which I think is going to add a lot of expenses, is just the wrong way to go. We need to come up with better solutions to these, and quite honestly, I think they're being perpetuated because certain special interest groups are benefiting from the way the government is operating today, and that's basically the reason why they're giving us what I would call phony numbers. Okay? I hope you give me some feedback. I don't care if you agree or disagree. I just ask that you check things out. Okay? Have a good day.